We recently just took our first trip ever from the United States to Disneyland Paris, and despite us having an overall fantastic time, we encountered 6 things that we wish we knew in advance. Some of these are positive and others not so positive. We're going to be sharing all those tips with you and so much more up next. Before we get started, only a quarter of the people watching right now are currently subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy any bit of today's video and or find any of the information I give today helpful in any way, then please help us out and consider subscribing to the channel. It's completely free and only takes 2 seconds to do. We are on the road to 100,000 subscribers and I'd love to have you be a part of this journey. While you're at it, leaving a like on the video helps us out tremendously as well, and it lets YouTube know to show it to more people who may be interested. Let's start the video off with a positive. The first thing we wish we knew before going to Disneyland Paris is that Disneyland Paris has some of the best versions of classic Disney attractions. So what I mean by this is Disneyland Paris has some Disney park staple attractions that can be found at both Disneyland in California and Walt Disney World in Florida. This includes attractions such as Big Thunder Mountain, Tower of Terror, It's a Small World, and Haunted Mansion, just to name a few. And what I didn't know is that the version of these attractions that exist in Disneyland Paris are the best versions of these attractions I've ever been on compared to both California and Florida. For example, their version of Big Thunder Mountain is a lot more intense than the versions that exist in the US parks. Not only that, but the majority of the attraction takes place on its own island. Tower of Terror at Walt Disney Studios is physically a clone of the version that existed in California, but it has recently been updated to be a much more terrifying experience with a longer, more randomized drop sequence and even has different storylines depending on the elevator shaft you're in. And of course, how can we forget the amazing version of the Haunted Mansion that exists in Paris known as Phantom Manor? I touched on this attraction a lot more in my final vlog from Disneyland Paris, but you cannot tell me that this isn't the absolute best version of the Haunted Mansion anywhere in the world. Of course, this was initially just my opinion, as not everyone is going to have the same reactions to these attractions as I did. However, after posting my 3 videos from Disneyland Paris, I got a lot of comments from folks feeling the same way as I did, so I felt it was worth it to mention in this video. The next thing I wish I knew before making my way to Disneyland Paris for the first time is actually something I didn't find out about until maybe a week before I got there. I actually had no idea that Disneyland Paris had its own dedicated train station on property. This means that there are plenty of options to get to Disneyland Paris from Charles de Gaulle Airport if that's where you're flying into. I have heard in the past that the Eurostar has made stops at this train station too, however I'm not too sure if that's still a thing now. I have an entire video dedicated to getting to Disneyland Paris via train from Charles de Gaulle on the channel now if you want to check that out for a step-by-step guide on how we did it. Either way, having a train station there on property makes getting to and from the park super easy and convenient if you're also looking to spend some time in the city as well. Let's get into some negatives now, because as much as I love Disneyland Paris, there are unfortunately some not so nice things that I wish I knew before going. The first of which being the smoking situation at Disneyland Paris. Now it is worth noting that there are designated smoking areas throughout the park, unlike at the US parks where you have to go outside the park to smoke. However, there are still a lot of guests who ignore the designated smoking areas and smoke freely anywhere they please in the park. This also wouldn't be that big of a problem if cast members would kindly ask guests to stop smoking and to please move to the designated area. However, the cast members at Disneyland Paris seem to not really care that guests are doing it, so at many points through our day we would have to walk through cigarette smoke clouds. Now, while this wasn't a huge issue for me and didn't ruin my experience by any means, I know this may negatively affect others in some pretty big ways, so I felt it was best to mention it here to give others with health conditions that may be aggravated by this a proper heads up if you're planning on going for the first time. Now, speaking of cast members, I unfortunately need to share another negative about Disneyland Paris that I wish I knew about before going. Now, while the good majority of cast members we interacted with were absolutely phenomenal, kind, and helpful, there were sadly a noticeable amount of cast members who had a visible and noticeable change in demeanor and overall willingness to help once they figured out we were not European. Now, to be fair, I had heard in the past that Paris cast members were notoriously rude to Americans, and while I was pleasantly surprised at how great the majority of cast members were to us, it didn't take long to realize that there is some credibility to American guests saying that Paris CMs were rude. I guess when I initially heard this, I just didn't want to believe it. Again, this isn't anything that made a huge impact on our trip, but it is something I wish I knew ahead of time. That way it didn't come as much of a shock once it happened for the 5th time on our first day. Next, I want to talk about the Fast Pass system at Disneyland Paris, or as it's known over there, Premier Access. I wish I knew in advance just how great the system is over there. Now, obviously, I wish we had free Fast Passes like we used to have back in the States, and I believe Disneyland Paris used to have free Fast Passes as well. But the paid system that exists now is a very easy system to figure out compared to the mess that is Genie Plus in the United States. There are 2 options for guests wishing to skip the lines at Disneyland Paris. You can get an individual Premier Access Pass for a single ride and pay per person for select rides where it will give you a designated return time, or you can opt to buy the Premier Access Ultimate Pass that allows you to experience all the attractions that offer Premier Access once per day whenever you desire. Obviously, the Ultimate Pass is a lot more expensive, but it comes with the freedom of being able to ride what you want when you want. The benefit to the system in Paris, based on my experience from my 3-day visit, is significantly shorter wait times in the Premier Access lines for every attraction I used it on. Compare that to how it works in the United States, where you pay one price to get skip the line access to multiple attractions and then still have to wait upwards of 15 to 20 minutes for it. I truly felt I was getting real value for my money in Paris when I paid the fairly reasonable price to skip the standby lines. As a first-time visitor who wanted to maximize my time at the parks, I felt the service was worth it, and my family felt the same way, so definitely take the time to look into this service more before heading out there to see if this is a good fit for your family's first visit. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is regarding the on-site Disneyland Paris hotels. Now, this is something that may mostly affect my North American viewers, but I wish I knew ahead of time that not all the hotels on Disneyland Paris property have air conditioning. For our quick visit, we wanted to stay on Disney property, but didn't want to shell out a lot of cash for it. Unfortunately, this was a mistake that we paid dearly for, as not only did we fail to do too much research on this hotel, but we also never considered not having air conditioning to be a problem we'd have. We stayed at Hotel Santa Fe, which is the value resort on Disneyland Paris property, and I unfortunately cannot recommend this hotel to anyone. The theming of the resort was cute, but the room was in terrible condition once you started looking around, and there was no air conditioning at all. We only had a ceiling fan with one low setting and a radiator that is used during the colder months. This was the one thing that really had the most negative impact on our experience. As we were coming back to the room for the first time from the park since checking in, and because our room wasn't ready that morning, we had to wait until later to see our room. It was pretty warm outside, so after carrying all our bags to our farther away room, we were looking forward to relaxing in the room for a bit. The room was pretty warm when we got inside, and we had no choice but to open the windows as much as we could, as it was cooler outside than in our room. I did take to Twitter to find out if this was an all resorts problem, and I learned that Santa Fe was likely the only resort on property without air conditioning. Again, this may be a problem that only affects my North American viewers, as we love our air conditioning, but I don't want any others to make the same mistake I did. So make sure you do your research on hotels before you book, and hopefully you can avoid being in the same situation we found ourselves in. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, there are the 6 things I wish I knew before heading out to Disneyland Paris for the first time ever. Again, overall, we had a fantastic time, but I really feel like if I knew these things ahead of my visit, then our first time would have been even better. I want to hear from you guys down in the comments section below. What are your first time experiences that you wish you knew before going to Disneyland Paris? Drop them down below so we can help other folks who may be planning a first time trip. While you're down there, please help us out by leaving a like on the video so it lets YouTube know that this video is actually good and it'll recommend it to more people. If you like what you saw here and you want to see more content from me in the future, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It's completely free to do and it'll help us reach our goal of 100,000 subscribers. I hope you are all having a wonderful day, morning, afternoon, and evening, and I'll see you guys in the next video.